Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Texas Developmental Screening and Surveillance ECHO, brought to you by UT Health San Antonio in collaboration with the Texas Department of State Health Services. My name is Maria Gutierrez, pronouns are she, her, and I will be facilitating today's session. A few housekeeping items before we do get started. To help with attendance, please enter your full name, affiliation, and email into the chat. Thank you to everyone who's already done that. Please remember to stay muted unless you are speaking. We do encourage everyone to use the chat and or use your raise your hand feature to pose any questions or share perspectives during today's presentation. As a reminder, these sessions are being recorded for later distribution. If you are having any type of connection issues, please privately chat Karen or UTECHO for any assistance you may need. Lastly, today's sessions will begin with some team introductions, followed by a didactic presentation, a patient case study, and then we'll move on to breakout rooms to help with small group discussion, which will be led by our hub team, and we'll end the session back in the main room. To ensure privacy, no personal health information is allowed at any point during the session. This does include name, addresses, birthdays, and any other identifiable information. Let us always make every effort to avoid any type of bias and stigmatizing terms so that we can continue having a space that is respectful and safe to learn. With that, I'll go ahead and get started with a few introductions of our team. First up, I do see Faith.
Good afternoon, everyone. Faith Rivera with Alice Avitas Consulting. Thank you so much for joining us today. Excited you all are here.
Thank you, Faith. It's always great to have you. We also have Dr. Dorothy Mandel.
Hi, I'm Dorothy Mandel. I'm an associate professor at UT Health Houston School of Public Health, and it's so great to see so many of you here today.
Thank you, Dr. Mandel. We also have Andrea Horton.
Good afternoon. I'm Andrea Horton, Executive Director at Champions for Children in Tyler. We are glad that you decided to join us today, and I'm excited about what we're going to learn more about.
Thank you, Andrea. We also have our guest speaker for today, Laura Marquez. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm joining you from El Paso, so very far, but still close in spirit. And I am representing an organization called PDN Children's. We're a community-based nonprofit here in the community, and we serve children with disabilities from around 0 to age 22-ish, depending on our various programs. And just happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Laura. We're excited for your presentation. Laura will also be presenting our case study for today, so we'll get to hear her speak twice. And with that, I think I will go ahead and just mute myself and let Laura take over once IT shares that presentation.
Thank you. Okay, we got this. So again, thank you everybody for sharing your lunch hour with us. I really appreciate you taking the time and allowing me to speak today. Again, my name's Laura Marquez. Just another quick an anecdote about me. So I've been in the disability services space for almost 20 years now in different capacities. I started my journey as an early childhood paraeducator in the public school setting. So I worked with little ones from about 3 to 8 years old. Most of the kiddos I worked with had severe medical disabilities, some genetic, some traumatic brain injury. A lot of the kiddos I work with were pretty medically fragile. They had trachs or G-tubes, often seizure disorders. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from. After I did my, service for 7 years working as a paraeducator, I went back to school and I got my social work degree, and I still wanted to kind of help families access and navigate services. So that is a little bit about me and how I am coming to this space. But we can go to the next slide. And again, really quick, these views are my own. The presentation and opinions are my own. They don't reflect that of my organization or even UT San Antonio. And I have no financial conflicts of interest. And next slide. And as Maria mentioned, I really do appreciate this bias disclosure. I think And you'll see this in my presentation. A lot of how we move in this space and when we talk about inclusion starts with our language. And I don't claim to have perfect language and that's not stigmatizing or offensive at times, but it's always about working towards that. And so again, if you hear something that I say and you need to give feedback, I welcome it. And always working towards having, that language and being aware. And we could go to the next slide. So the objectives for today, for our brief presentation, I'm going to go through some of this pretty quickly, but we're going to define inclusion and discuss how it benefits in children in the childcare setting. We'll review some of the rights and responsibilities under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA. We'll discuss some reasonable accommodations and how they, would be applied in your childcare settings, and then talk about some resources that can support you, what you can possibly take advantage of as you move to try to make your spaces more inclusive. And then we'll wrap it up with the case study and the small group discussion. Next slide. So I've been in this space for a long time, and I'm constantly, trying to find what is inclusion. There's been definitions that have evolved for over time, but I found this definition from the Ministry of Education and Childcare from British Columbia. And I really loved this definition because when you talk about inclusion, it really is an act. It's not, I was in the public education space, and when I was new to this space, we talked about inclusion as, oh, such and such child is getting their inclusion time, or they're going to inclusion. And really, when we think about it, inclusion is actually a concept, a mindset. It's the act that we are doing to create meaningful access and opportunities for people with disabilities. So in our space, children with disabilities, we're inviting, we're welcoming to children, we're open and accepting. We do things that provide meaningful participation to involve children with disabilities and their families in spaces. We are informed. Not only are we informed, so what you're doing here today is you're informing yourself about what is inclusion. We're going to be informed about what are some of our responsibilities under the law, and we're going to inform ourselves about ways that we can create inclusion. And all of this, we do it with intention. We do it with good intentions. It's not to say that we're perfect and that we're not going to get it wrong, but if we're coming to this discussion and this space with good intentions, that's always the best place to start. So yeah, I really love this definition. And you all, if you want access to the presentation, everything is hyperlinked so you can see some of the things that I've pulled resources from. Next slide. So the basis of everything that I really feel very strongly with, and again, it just comes from a lot of years of having conversations and researching and looking into this, is inclusion begins with our words. And so when we, again, when we think about how we talk about something, how it dictates then how we believe something and then how we act on it. So really, when we're talking about inclusion, the best way to start is the words we use. And so if we think about our language, it will change the way we think and then eventually the way we act and behave. So some of the words that we try to talk about to reduce stigma is to not talk about disability as something that is a bad thing. In the disability space, we really, and as advocates, we really truly believe disability is just a natural way of life. Disability is very common, and if we just move towards trying to be universal in spaces, this is how we can create meaningful spaces. So again, we try to stay away from words like confined to a wheelchair, right? A person who is a wheelchair user is using that device to enable them to get around and move throughout the world. They are a wheelchair user, but they are not trapped in it or confined to it. Nonverbal is a big one that we've seen evolve more recently in more recent times, where we're trying to move away from kiddos that or people who we don't try to define as they are nonverbal. We try to use the words where they are non-speaking because, and this kind of comes from when we think about nonverbal, we perceive somebody as not having a voice or not having thoughts or their own self-determination. And so switching that around and saying they are non-speaking or they use alternative communication reminds us that this person still has a voice, they still have a way to communicate. How can we work to promote that and not silence or devalue their way of communication? Again, normal kids, when we're talking about kids with disabilities or kids without disabilities, we really try to stay away from words like normal or abnormal because again it puts a negative connotation to the person's experience as being disabled or not disabled, and it defines, kiddos as normal and abnormal. And those are definitely terms that we want to stay away from. Again, suffers from autism. We want to just speak about the experience of the individual. And again, this is evolving now where you have what is called person first language, where you talk about the child has autism or a child with autism. And then we have an evolution in the disability space of identity first language, where you're seeing more language about this, I am autistic, they are autistic. And so again, it's all about informing ourselves about what language is used and acceptable. As a provider, I tend to shift back and forth between person first language and identity first language, but at the end of the day, you're talking to a human being. They are a person. So you go through, you let them guide you. You be the learner and they guide you of how they want to be referred to. And then the last one is newer again. This one comes more from like a disability services space, or allies where, we talk about euphemisms like they're differently abled or they have special needs. And so what we're seeing now from the disability community, which is folks that are disabled, they are telling us, they're telling providers, they're telling the world that they don't have special needs. They just have needs like all of us. Like if I took my glasses off right now, I would not be able to see the presentation or see your faces, right? If we got disconnected from Zoom right now, we would all be out of luck, right? We wouldn't be able to have access to this. So really it's just talking about what is our need for access. I'm able to be here with you all today from El Paso, over 500 miles away from most of you because we have things that we adapt. So again, when we think about that, we think about the language we use and how it guides our beliefs and our actions. Next slide. So inclusion and a lot of the research talking about inclusion, there's really just very few downsides. It's beneficial for everybody involved. So when we're talking about a child, an early learning or child care or early education space, when we're talking about children with disabilities, where, we know that the child that has a disability, they benefit from just being exposed to their peers without disabilities. They learn from their peers, just like we all learn from peer interactions. Our foundation is built in relationships. And so having children with and without disabilities be educated in the same space is the ideal because they both learn. Our typically developing children or kiddos without disabilities, they learn benefits too, by being exposed to an experience other than their own. They learn empathy, they learn understanding, they learn acceptance from a very young age. They learn not to question. I used to be when I was in the classroom setting, I would be accompanying my student, and this was from very young age, kindergarten, right? And we don't intentionally put these views in kids, but I would have kids ask me all the time, Miss, what's wrong with her? And my student would be next to me in a wheelchair, and I would say, oh, there's nothing wrong with her. She just uses a wheelchair to get around just like you walk to get around. And so kind of talking to kids about that, and it's a natural question, not to shame kids when they ask questions about that, to answer them directly. I really feel very strongly that kids can learn these concepts from very young with just, simple explanations. So normalization is really the first step for making all the rest of the spaces. For families, coming from that perspective as a service provider, um, working with families and understanding that when they first get a diagnosis, it changes the way that they thought their world would be. A lot of families share that they feel isolated, they feel like nobody understands them. And so having inclusion just again shows families that they belong, their child belongs, that they're wanted in a community, that they're welcomed. It reduces stigma so that families are more likely to engage in help seeking activities or, help seeking for their child or for themselves. And really that's the goal, right? Is we want to end with helping families. And for inclusion for staff and for programs, again, the benefits are you're widening your lens as a professional to be able to serve more um, a larger group of children, right? You're widening your professional capacity to serve. You're getting additional training like you are right now. You're promoting positivity and inclusive environments as a program, as an entity that's in the community, right? Whether you're a licensed childcare facility or a home care provider, your entity is in the community. You're a part of the community that you reside in. And so creating that space does a lot for just helping families feel supported and helping you feel like you're having a service or a part in your community. Next slide. So we'll go over the legal framework. And so why are we talking about this? What are some of the guiding, principles for why is it important to move through this space? And really just some facts, and you probably have gone over this in some of your other ECHO sessions, but I like to share these numbers, and I didn't put them on the slide. But I think from 2022 birth and fertility rates, Texas is home to 1.1 million babies. So that makes all of us and our work in the early childhood space huge, right? Because there's 1.1 million babies being born in Texas, and they're going to come to us. They're going to come to us seeking services, seeking care, and that makes our responsibility very, very important. And again, when we're talking about disability or developmental delays, we know that 1 in 4 children will experience a developmental delay, and 1 in 6 of those children will go on to having an actual diagnosed condition. So if you're working with children, you are going to come across a child that has a developmental delay or disability. There's no way around that. So how do we as professionals make sure that we have the training and the capacity to serve and work with every child, not just some children? Next slide. So the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, and actually we're coming up in July to the 35th anniversary of the ADA. So in 1990, before 1990, there was very few protections for people with disabilities in the public space as far as civil rights. So what the Americans with Disabilities Act did and does to this day is it ensures equal access for individuals with disabilities in public spaces, community spaces. It also prohibits discrimination. So it protects folks with disabilities from being discriminated against because of their disability. And so there's 5 areas or 5 titles of the ADA. So folks are protected in employment settings. They're protected in like state government programs. So when you think about like recreational, like parks and recs and different programs that are available in our communities. And Title III is the one that really outlines where you fall in under early child care centers or home centers is public accommodations. And then Title IV is telecommunications. So web-based, telephone services. So folks that might be deaf or have a hearing condition, they have access to those telephone services that are enable them to communicate. Closed captioning is a big one. It's creating access, for folks that, and again, closed captioning is not just for people who are deaf. It's for people who, might have a language, speak a different language and other than English, or might have processing difficulties where they need additional aids to process words and information. So again, those are the things that are providing access, making our world accessible to people with disabilities. And then miscellaneous provisions is really just the part that outlines some of the process for submitting complaints, if there's a discrimination and other kind of outlines like that. But we're going to focus on the next slide we can go to. We're going to focus on Title III, which is where the purview you all fall under. We all fall under. Next slide. So again, the legal framework, and again, we're talking about our legal framework. When we talk about the legalities of things, it's really, at the end of the day, the ADA is the minimum, right? It's the minimum of what we can do to be within the law of providing accessibility, and we strive and we hope to go up from there. But if we're looking at the minimum, for public accommodations, ADA requires that childcare centers, licensed childcare homes, and registered childcare homes make their facilities accessible to individuals with disabilities. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. It also requires reasonable accommodations and modifications to policies, practices, procedures, or the physical environment that makes it possible for you to include a child with a disability, individuals with disabilities, but not just the child, but if the parent is disabled and their child is a learner in your facility, you are also bound by ADA to make your services accessible to the parent of said child. Reasonable accommodations really means, that it can't be a undue burden on you as you're a business owner. You are also operating in the confines of your budget, of your ability to make certain modifications. So reasonable, within reason. But really, many accommodations and modifications are actually very reasonable, very low cost many times. And so that's what we'll talk about. I think a lot of times folks get kind of scared away from the thought of it, but also the important thing to remember is that reasonable accommodations and modifications is a case by case. So let's say you evaluate as a provider that possibly after you've tried to implement something, you cannot provide a service to one child, but that is just that child, right? If you get another child that has a need, you have to reevaluate on that child, not just say, oh, well, because we couldn't serve one, we can't serve anymore. So it's always reasonable accommodations on a case-by-case basis for every individual that is interacting with you and in your business. Next slide. So again, with every law there are expectations and there are exceptions to it, right? Because there is an understanding that not every facility is going to be able to make modifications or accommodations. So the exceptions are rare because honestly, there's many times that it can be made. But the point is that there's a demonstration that you attempted to make these accommodations possible. So where it would be within reason to possibly not is to where those accommodations would fundamentally alter the nature of your program or pose an undue burden on your operations. So that could be you can't be asked if your normal operation hours for every child that you serve are from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. You're not necessarily required to change your operation hours because you're offering that same block of operation time for every child under your care, for every family that's using your services. So again, it's case by case. It's based on each kind of modification or accommodation. As providers, you're also not required to provide devices or aids. That's not within the purview of what you're asked to provide to the children or the adults in your care, or the parents of the children in your care. And then again, the last situation is where the child's presence or the necessary care would pose a direct threat to the health or safety of the other children in your care or to your teachers, your providers. So again, those are the three exceptions to the ADA and in Title III. Next slide. Good time. Okay. So again, with accommodations, really a lot of these are just examples we'll go over. I think when we do the case study, we'll dive more into detail in the discussion, but these are just some examples, right? So again, when you're thinking about families that have a child with a disability, toileting is one thing, right? So they might be 3 or 4 years old and might not be potty trained yet, but you have a policy that, says that you cannot provide that service to a child who's 3 or 4 or however it is outlined, but perhaps you can change that policy for that certain case for that child. So changing a discipline policy, changing your medication policy, right, to accommodate the fact that you might have a child that has a seizure disorder and they have to take a medication at a certain time frame. And understanding that that is a case where you could be able to provide the medication and not potentially, deny services to a child based on that. Auxiliary aids. So there's different things that you could use, picture in childcare for every child. I mean, honestly, every child can benefit from visuals. So you can have visuals that are present. This one too is big. If you have, let's say you have a child in your care and their parents are deaf. What if they need an interpreter to have, to understand the services that you have? That would fall under the purview of you being able to provide an interpreter for the parents so that they can have meaningful access to the same thing that all the parents of your children have. Next slide. Removing physical barriers. So again, some of these could be difficult, right? If widening a doorway or installing ramps, it depends, right? If you're a business owner and you're renting a facility, and you have to, get permissions and go through processes or access, different grants or funds, that depends. But these are just some of the things that you could do to make your facilities accessible. Even just rearranging furniture or having grab bars, installing grab bars in toilet stalls. Other things, that it depends on a case-by-case basis for each home, right? It might not be feasible for one center or one child home-based facility to have one-on-one support for a child because it's not within their capacity and their operations to hire additional personnel. But again, it's on a case-by-case basis to evaluate if that is really within your capacity, that you've at least looked into it and, try to make some form of accommodation or look into how it may be possible. Next slide. These are some of the resources that I wanted to include. They're all hyperlinked. So again, you might know of some of them already, but if you receive the presentation, you'll have access to them in the hyperlink. Kids Included Together has several modules of just how to implement some of these strategies and examples, a ton of resources. You could get lost on their website just clicking on all of their different programs and resources. And then I linked the childcare regulation standards as applied to ADA. Texas A&M AgriLife has an inclusion training. Disability Rights Texas has, different resources and information to help make these things possible. And then the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, there's an FAQ that I linked on here that just you can refer to different questions of how it's possible so that you know what falls within your responsibilities, what doesn't fall within your responsibilities, what could be feasible. There's even, tax deductions for questions that can be addressed and things like that. So that has the information on that website for trying to use those services. And then I think the next slides are the case study, right?
Yes, Laura, we're first going to go into announcements and then we'll go back into the case study.
Okay.
But thank you so much for that presentation. I do see someone that posted in the chat asking about the links. Yes, everything will be sent out to everyone, I believe on Monday. So you'll all be expecting the slide deck that includes the hyperlinks as well. With that, does anybody have any questions for Laura? Okay, no worries. I'm sure everybody will have some plenty of questions during the case study. Oh, go ahead, Andrea. Just see you unmuted.
Sorry, I was just reading one of the questions that I thought was interesting from Lauren, and maybe she can give a little bit more detail to it, but about providing an interpreter. If it's financially not feasible for you, is that considered a unreasonable request, or is that something that we have to do? And I asked not to call Lauren out, but because we've had that same discussion here in our offices about that when we've had clients come to us.
So I let my certification lapse right after COVID, but I was an interpreter for the deaf for a long time. My base pay at that time, only 3 years in from school, was 35 an hour. Plus you had to pay the fee for the company I worked for. So I do know firsthand like that if for small homes and stuff, that's not going to be affordable. It is, unfortunately, it's one of those things where large companies can afford us, but it's really hard in a center setting.
It is cost restrictive for sure, especially if you're considering, the number and types of interactions and the way. But yeah, I definitely get you there, Lauren. And again, it's based on the capacity of your center, right? And if it would make an undue burden, at our center, we're a larger center. We have a little bit more resources at our disposal. And also because we're a nonprofit, right? And so we also have access to other types of grants and things like that. So it is very much, again, because it's case by case, right? It's like what would apply for your entity, for your operations. Of course, yes, we all want to be able to provide that access and those services, but it is not always possible.
And then there's another kind of follow-up question from someone else. Can you use a family member as an interpreter, or do you need to hire someone?
Oh yeah, I'm Lauren. I see you answered that one because I'm like, I do not presume to be an expert in law, so I'm not gonna interpret law in that way. I will tell you, and ethically, you're right, because when I was a paraeducator, and I didn't know this when I was a paraeducator, but I was a paraeducator in Illinois, in the Midwest and rural area. And I was hired specifically as a bilingual paraeducator to work with a family. I was in IEP meetings IEP meetings in Texas, it's ARDs, but I was in IEP meetings and I was translating for the family, and that's a no-go, And so ideally we don't want that happening. We don't because again, yeah, we're falling within privacy standards, ethical standards. So, I mean, I appreciate you speaking up and saying that, Lauren, because I cannot even assume that I know the answer for that for sure. Different word issue. Sorry, I'm just reading the other comments. Any other comments or questions?
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for those questions in the chat. I'd like to move on over to announcements. Karen, if you can share those slides for the team, please. All right, so please don't forget to claim credit using your TechPeds account and scanning the QR code on the screen. Karen will also share that link with you all in the chat. We'll make sure to also share that via email as well. Are you interested in presenting a case? Cases can describe a challenge that you're currently presenting or facing with a child under your care. Challenges can be around screening, intervention, referrals, etc. As a case presenter, you don't have to prepare a formal presentation. As you can see, things are a little informal and casual. We just want everyone to kind of just learn from one another. So if you are interested, please feel free to shoot us an email for that. We'll make sure to put you on the calendar. Join us at the next Texas Dishes Echo on Friday, June 13th. The presentation topic will be inclusion part 2. So that'll be a follow-up to today's presentation by Laura. And as a final reminder, after today's case presentation, we are moving over to breakout rooms for a case discussion. And then we'll be moving back to the main session where everyone will have an opportunity to hear from everyone that attended the other breakout rooms. So with that, I will go ahead and ask Karen to share the case study, and Laura, you can walk us through it.
Okay. Oh, I was gonna say I can just start talking about it. Well,
No worries. We just give it to you a couple seconds. Go ahead, take it
so
away.
again, this is a scenario. This is not a real client or a real name or a real learning center. So it's just for the basis of kind of giving an example and promoting some further conversation. So Mateo is a 3-year-old boy recently enrolled in Sunshine Sprouts Early Learning Center. He is an energetic little boy who loves cars, dinosaurs, and tight hugs. Lately, Mateo's teachers and parents have noticed that he sometimes becomes overstimulated in noisy or highly structured environments. This might lead to impulsive behaviors such as yelling, leaving the group area, or eloping, knocking over things when he's frustrated. And to note, Mateo has recently been diagnosed with autism. So the challenge posed, or the discussion that we would like to have, is currently Sunshine Sprouts has a zero tolerance policy for aggressive behavior and includes a protocol for sending a child home after 2 behavioral incidents in 1 day. So Mateo is on his 2nd week, and he has had a difficult morning during circle time, pushed a toy shelf over, and after he was asked to stop shouting, and he was sent home, and his parents were told that another similar incident could lead to suspension from the program. And then the questions that are posed, and I don't know, for the purpose of time, because I think I probably definitely went over my allotted time. But we can, these are some of the questions, and maybe the breakout rooms can just decide, which questions they speak to them more. But what are some of the legal and ethical responsibilities of Sunshine under the ADA? What changes could be made to better support Mateo? How can the center support the family's concerns and collaborate with outside service providers? Because again, we're an entity, but we're not alone. So what other things could be out there? And then what kind of training or support might the staff need to effectively implement such accommodations?
Thank you, Laura, for that great presentation. Now we'll go ahead and give Karen a few moments to start transitioning everyone into a breakout session. As a reminder, our hub team, Dr. Mandel, Faith, and Andrea, will be live in these breakout rooms to help facilitate discussion. Once you are prompted with that breakout room, please make sure you do accept. And then we'll give everyone a heads up when breakout rooms are ready to close to meet back in the main session. Okay, so it looks like everyone's just about back. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining those breakout sessions. I was in the one with Andrew, and there were some great discussions going on, and they're very lively. So I actually will go ahead and hand it over to you, Andrea, for a summary of discussion for the breakout room.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, our discussion really revolved around making sure that we really understand the behavior that's happening and the root cause of it. And so doing observations, talking with the parent before we just dismiss and suspend a student out of the classroom, trying to get an idea of what might work at home or what their suggestions are, trying to find ways to help that child be successful in the classroom before we just automatically use our policy and suspend them from the classroom. But also building that relationship with that family so that they feel supported and so that they have we're not just upset with their child. We talked about helping families really begin to identify when it's time to start seeking out diagnoses and the value and the importance of it. And then we also talked about the importance of really supporting our staff with training, with their own self-care, and with opportunities for them to have a break so that they can be the best that they need to be for the children in their care.
Thank you, Andrea, for that. I'll go ahead and have Faith share a summary of your breakout room.
Our room was wonderful. Some of the big takeaways that they had mentioned was really asking the parents what works at home or what things they see at home to be able to support within the classroom. And if they're working with any outside providers or at a partial day school program, having communication with the teachers or providers that also work with that child to be able to continue that continuity of care. Some additional pieces that were mentioned is support groups for families with children with autism, behavior coaching support for teachers, and creating calming spaces like calming rooms or sensory deprivation spaces that all children can benefit from. But then specifically, there's pieces in there for children who have sensory difficulties or autism.
Thank you, Faith. And now we'll go ahead and wrap up with Dr. Mandel with a summary of your breakout room and then overall summary for today's session.
We also talked about calming spaces and talked about actually a lot of the approaches that we talked about. We also talked about how they're just universal, can be used universally, and are through the research I have done with childcare and also with families, they are also indicators of high quality childcare, period. So one of the things that we also talked about is small fixes and tries before you need to move to something bigger. Because a lot of things that sometimes it's just small adjustments that need to be made, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes you need to do more, but trying these small fixes first especially before you move straight into a suspension or an expulsion. And then the other thing we talked about, and Laura, I really appreciate you bringing this up, is looking for your community for additional support, that you're not there doing it by yourself. There are plenty of people in the community who could come in and help you figure out how to make your child care center more inclusive. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure everybody was aware of as well is that if you have a child with a developmental delay or disability that needs inclusion support, and that child is already receiving child care subsidies, you can work with the parents to request additional child care subsidy for that child there through the inclusion grant. And I put the link to the inclusion requirements on TWC's website. This is something that I know is not being utilized to its fullest extent. And when I talk to child care centers, most of them don't even know that that is available to them. And so this may be bring in enough to help you maybe bring in one more person part-time to help float through the classroom so that you can provide more care to that particular child who needs it. And this is part of using your community and helping your community, bringing your community into your child care center. And So that is an issue, and we just want to recognize and understand that space is an issue in childcare centers, and childcare centers often use their space to their maximum ability that they possibly can use them, and that sometimes space can get in the way, and physical space in and of itself can be an issue. But using your community to help come in and figure out, maybe it's a matter of just moving a few things around. Somebody in our group talked about just rearranging the bookcases to make a little cubby hole for kids to go into, was the way that they handled that. And then another person very nicely also said it's in forums like this too, and sharing tips and tricks that each other has been using and keeping that open, and bringing in your community of other childcare providers to help figure out and troubleshoot things that can happen as things that you can do. It was a very awesome discussion.
It was. I really like that idea of just, making those minor readjustments to bookcases, and that'll make, solve so many things for the little ones. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. I know we are a few minutes past the hour, but we do appreciate everyone still with us. If I can get Karen to show the QR code one more time. Karen has posted both the tech peds and just evaluation link in the chat. These will also be shared via email with today's presentations. If the links and QR code aren't working, please make sure to try to use a different web browser. And if not, please contact us and we'll be more than happy to help you out with that as well. We'll leave that up for a few seconds for everyone to scan in. We thank you everyone again for joining us for today's session. And we look forward to seeing everyone for Inclusion Part 2 on June 13th. Thank you everyone. Have a good day.